So we now have our next speaker. Probably doesn't need an introduction really, but anyway, I'll do it. Sir Jonathan Porritt. Jonathan was co-founder of Forum for the Future, and former co-chair of the Green Party, former chair of the Sustainable Development Commission, so experience at government level. And Jonathan also director of Friends of the Earth from 1984 to 1990, which seems a long time ago. And well, let's review how much has changed since then. But anyway, so he's going to speak to us on sustainable housing, food, energy, and employment. How should these be created? Jonathan.
Thank you, Tony. I am going to speak to those points, but I am also going to speak to the initiative that we are celebrating today, and in particular I am going to address many of the points that Nick raised in his talk, sometimes to commend those points and sometimes to critique them. Because I think it is really important today that we use this opportunity, having brought so many people so motivated to make this succeed, that we use this opportunity to add to the ideas that are already emerging and to ensure that they are as robust as possible during what is going to be a difficult time. It is going to be a difficult time. So the first thing to say is that although this is a bit of a party pooper opening, none of this is new. None of this is new. People have been doing community-based initiatives of this kind for as long as I've been in the Green Movement, and that's 50 years. So it really is quite important at the start to take account of what it is that other organizations have done, what it is that gave them longevity, durability, what made it possible to get cut through and traction with local populations. And most recently, of course, we had the phenomenon of transition towns across the whole of the UK, now a very large international movement, which focused on, guess what? Local food, energy, housing, and jobs. So we must be aware of those who have gone before and the fact that we are standing on their shoulders. Some of that, of course, is intellectual preparedness for this. We have for a long time understood the really critical aspect of the metabolism of any particular spatial entity, whether it is a town or a city or a community or a rural area, whatever it might be, and working with that metabolism to seek to find improvements in the way we meet people's needs and meet their aspirations. Very powerful movement during the course of the 1980s and 1990s called bioregionalism, which it's worth just checking in on, as this had a huge amount to say about the dangers of just sticking with our human boundaries. So I love the idea of a sustained circle. Everybody loves circles. I noticed a somewhat arbitrary process of drawing that circle, if you don't mind me saying, Nick, but I could see why you followed that line. But don't forget, those circles that we have drawn according to completely arbitrary demographic processes often have nothing whatsoever to do with nature. And the point about bioregionalism is to put nature at the heart of how we do these circles. And I was very struck by the point from the gentleman there about the flooding issues that this area has suffered from and will undoubtedly suffer from again, particularly if you have such chronically bad decision making as you seem to imply. You can't address flooding through an arbitrary, sustained circle that isn't taking account of watersheds and how water flows through any system. So you may need to flex the concept of human-defined circles to take better account of what it is that nature would expect of a circle of that kind. Building on that metabolism idea, a huge amount of work has been done historically to start with an understanding of the assets in any community. You've got a wonderful asset there in the landfill site, which lies at the heart of this Sustain Wiltshire project, and it's obviously a very big part of the local community, employs a lot of people, generates a lot of wealth, is trusted, and is an excellent starting point, epicenter, for making some really good things happen in the wider community. But you have to have a more comprehensive asset analysis than just starting with one place where you've got some fantastic things that you can make happen. And here I would urge you to have a really careful look at a book by Kate Raworth called Donut Economics, which analyzes the whole value of taking an asset-based approach to what exists in a local community. Physical assets, technological assets, financial assets, and of course natural assets, the assets that come from the way we manage nature itself. To take that asset-based approach to how a community can maximize the synergies between those different sets of assets in order to achieve these lasting outcomes. One of the things that Kate Raworth, stresses above all else is work out the points in your circle where the wealth is leaking out. Those points usually come through big business, taking profits from the enterprises in those smaller community-based circles, without any regard whatsoever for the way in which that wealth was actually generated to begin with. And we only need think in this country of our utilities, of water companies, I'm sorry to have to say this, of energy companies, which have often just simply taken the profit from their use of the assets in these communities without any regard whatsoever for stopping that leakage and keeping the value created in the community. So leakage of economic value becomes a critically important point from the perspective of making sustainable communities of this kind really work. Okay, so you did ask me to talk a little bit specifically about housing, energy, food and jobs. Well, thanks a lot. That's great. It's a little bit difficult for me to do this because obviously you haven't heard yet from Nick about the super midden, which is at the heart of the food production opportunity that lies here. So I'm a little bit constrained because it's your idea, but I obviously have to refer to it because otherwise I can't really say very much about food. So let me start with that. So the super midden medieval idea that communities sometimes, not always, manage to harness some of the regenerative qualities of their waste heaps, particularly in terms of the heap that they generated. So for crappers, there is an opportunity now to use that biodigestion process going on in any landfill process to capture the methane coming from those cells within the landfill site, to make sure that methane is then turned into benign energy, which will then help the rest of the production scheme, to use the CO2, and I think, Nick, but maybe you'll sort this out in my mind later, to somehow clean up the hydrogen sulfate, which is also coming from those landfill gases. Local communities know a bit about hydrogen sulfate because it's the stuff that they usually don't like very much because it stinks horribly. So this is a really interesting scheme to build greenhouses, quite a lot of these greenhouses, if I got this right. Each greenhouse is 800 square meters, and the total extent of this greenhouse development will be 56,000 square meters over time, which I calculate, if I'm correct here, as 70 800 square meter greenhouses. Okay, so that's a lot. And this is a prototype design for these greenhouses. They'll be purpose-built to make sure that they are properly insulated, because the whole trick here is to make sure that the food production going on inside those greenhouses is not being contaminated by what else is going on outside in nature. I know that sounds a bit odd, but the last thing you want is any other bits of nature getting into your greenhouse, particularly things like pollen from other species or invasive insects or whatever else it might be. So I look at this and I think this is a really interesting idea, and I think it's got real credibility. The investment capital required is obviously something that Crappers is assessing, and what return on that invested asset will look like, I couldn't possibly say at this juncture. It's a big scheme. It'll stretch the resources of any community interest company right to the edge, because it's big. Do you want to pick Nick up on one point, if I may? The suggestion, Nick, is that this is going to work because the food that you produce in these 800 specially insulated greenhouses producing high quality vegetables, greens, fruit and so on, must be sold at as low a price as the equivalent product that they would be able to buy in any supermarket. Not possibly in the farm shop here, I notice, but nonetheless, fairly important part of your view, Nick, is that no one will buy into this if they have to pay more money. One of the reasons why we're in such a mess now, and one of the reasons why we're heading towards some kind of climate apocalypse of one sort or another, because we do not pay the real price to produce the things that we need. And yes, you are right, supermarkets do get a huge additional cost because they're massively complicated supply chain issues, logistics, distribution, warehousing, and then into the supermarkets themselves. That is a big cost. But the way they then keep their prices lower is by externalizing a lot of their costs onto the environment. Which is why agriculture is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions here in the UK. Which is why a lot of water pollution isn't coming from our sewage, it's coming from runoff from farmers' fields, because they're allowed to do that because we have a regulatory body in the Environment Agency that can't be asked to prosecute. But that's why our food is so cheap, because we're not paying the real price for the damage that we are doing to the environment. So pursuing cheapness is complicated. And one needs to be absolutely clear that the cheapness that you hope you'll be able to produce through this alternative production scheme on the supermitten does not come at an additional burden to the environment, and is, if you like, competing in the right place with supermarkets, because that's where they are getting a lot of the benefits of cheap food today. I won't say anything more about that because there's obviously a lot more to be said, and Nick's going to talk about that after lunch. Don't forget, that's just the fresh produce. You've still got dairy and meat, and I noticed that you very generously said, Nick, that you don't actually intend to take over the totality of dairy and meat production in the sustained circle. You're going to leave a few other farmers to do that. It's very generous of you, I really like that. And maybe you will rapidly be able to persuade them to stop producing as much meat as people produce today. Because trust me, if we don't build into our vision of what a sustainable community looks like, roughly an 80% reduction in dairy and meat produce, we will not be living sustainably. This is not a comfortable area to go in rural communities, I have discovered over the years, because there's something about rurality that says, yes, but we're close to the land, and that livestock share that land with us. And that's how our image of farming and the reality of farming on the ground has grown up, us cheek by jowl with the animals, which we look after, hopefully well, not always, and which we then bring to people as part of their diet. Gotta go. Sorry, gotta go. Roughly an 80% reduction in total per capita meat consumption over the course of the next 15 to 20 years. That's a hell of a thing. And if the sustained circle that you get going here still allows for no diminution in average per capita meat consumption, you're selling yourself short, even though you'll have a much easier life when it comes to talking to the farmers. So much for food. Housing. Again, I'm jumping ahead because you may well be talking about this, Nick, this afternoon, but what I really liked about the idea about genuinely affordable, don't forget the term affordable housing is a massively abused bit of terminology today. Most of the units that are built as affordable units are not actually affordable units at all. So the word is being used by volume house builders to persuade us poor suckers that they have something resembling a moral conscience. They have a total void where a moral conscience might otherwise reside. Volume house builders care nothing about the people who will live in their houses, about the environmental costs of building houses and the way they build them today, and the implications of that for future generations. Literally nothing. All they care about, obviously, is the degree to which different business models for new building, new housing models, will add to their profitability. So the critical idea that you've come up with, which I think is really smart, is to take away that development value that farmers would otherwise expect, speculative development value, negotiating directly with volume house builders, so that the whole price story instantly is inflated by this super pumped up land value created by speculators and farmers working together. That will require national legislation. Sure as hell, you won't be able to do that yourselves in one little community. It would be nice if we could, but you absolutely won't be able to. But take heart, Labour is actually consulting now on what will need to happen to get more affordable units built in rural areas by taking out that speculative land value increase that farmers otherwise expect. So that's exciting, and there's a lot to be done. But of course, then you've got to build the houses, not just affordably, you've got to make them super sustainable. So by and large, you need to think about the building materials that you're using. So much brilliant stuff now about building with timber. A lot of techniques have been totally revolutionized about building materials that we can use now. And again, that would be hugely important for the future. And of course, they've got to be super efficient. So with a starting point for any genuinely sustainable, genuinely affordable new house for local people is that their energy bills should not exceed £100 per annum. It's doable. I know. I've seen these houses built. I've been in them. And it's very exciting when you see the implications of that for communities over time. So this is a real place of expertise. And behind that lies this story about what is it in what you're proposing that is going to get local residents in your circle excited about what you're doing. And here I want to push back a little bit, Nick, on what I can only describe as a somewhat patriarchal, top-down model of you don't have to change anything you do in life because we're going to sort it out for you, and you just, in your own little way, you just carry on doing what you do, and we'll just sort it out for you because we're the guys who know about it, and everything will be hunky-dory. Now, the lesson you should have taken away, I'm not sure whether you did or not, from Jarvis's rather sad story about the rewilding site that got trashed by umpteen lawnmowers, the message you should have taken away from that was that rewilding scheme probably wasn't done with the full engagement of the local community, and certainly not with the lawnmower element in the local community. If you want these schemes to be resilient, robust, durable over time, proper longevity, sorry, you have to bring people with you. It's bloody hard work. It is not easy. For the engineers amongst you, it's even more irritating because you have to do all sorts of things that you don't really want to do, which is sit and explain the laws of thermodynamics and all the rest of it. But you're going to have to do that. If you want to have more than a flash in the wooden basset pan, you have got to engage with people and bring them into that sense of them as co-creators of what it is that you're actually doing. Okay, so that's probably enough for me, because I'd like to use my last 10 minutes for a little bit of Q&A. The last thing is, you see I've come around to, I'm not going to talk about energy because it's, in a way, it's too obvious. It really is too obvious. Every local community in the whole of the UK could generate 100% of the energy that it needs from renewables, from super efficient storage, and from super efficiency at every point in the value chain. It is so easy to do, technically, but it's still really difficult to do from a planning perspective. I don't think I saw in the proposal for the super mid, and I'm not sure I saw much elaboration around the solar investments you're going to be making, or the wind farms you're going to be making, and the investment in new battery technology and all of that. You can't just do it off a super midden. We're talking about quite a lot of people using quite a lot of energy, probably not very efficiently at the moment. So there's going to have to be a whole big push on the renewable and efficiency side of all of this. So you can see, I've gone straight into the human behavior bit, as well as the technology bit. Any sustainability initiative of this kind depends as much on understanding people as it does on understanding technology. And that's where it gets really tricky. And that's why a lot of people that have this huge surge of energy to get things moving, to really crack this conundrum of why so many things don't work in our society, and they don't. And that surge of energy to say, we've got to sort this out, is ridiculous. But often you're jumping over here and you forget that people are still here and they're not with you here. So beware of a tech-driven, top-down, super-engineered set of solutions, and do a bit of backtracking into the community and see where that all takes you. That's me lot. More or less.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Jonathan. I think we have a few, about 5 minutes maybe, just.
I hope so, because I did speak for 21 minutes, which is
Perfect.
4 minutes
You've
less
done this
than you
before.
told me.
You've done this before.
I know. Just a bit showing off now.
Okay, obviously you've added to the conversation richly, I think, with some of the critiques and challenges around some of the model we're looking at, so that's great. And we'll explore that this afternoon,
Yeah.
but for the moment, any questions? Do you choose?
You're among farmers here today, cattle farmers, sheep farmers, etc. But what I took from what you said about farming, the population has to decrease its consumption of livestock animals in order to survive on this planet. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Alan Jones, he was a television presenter for Sky News Australia, and he made an interesting comment. He made a comment on television where he reminded people that he had asked the deputy leader of the Labour Party in Australia what percentage of the atmosphere was made up of carbon dioxide. Now, this is the deputy leader of the Labour Party in Australia, and she didn't know. And he said, well, I can tell you, it's 0.04 of 1%. And what the human race contributes to that 0.04% is an absolute fraction of that. So I'm wondering, what percentage of the livestock on the planet at the moment makes up that 0.04%?
Modern farming, so that's the whole value chain, including meat and dairy, contributes 30% of total greenhouse gases today. Most of that is methane, not CO2. So CO2 is not the issue with intensive livestock production. It is the methane. And of course, Grappers knows all about the methane, because right now, you flare that methane, and you cause 3,800 tons of CO2 to be emitted to the atmosphere every year, if I read my briefing correctly. Oh, well, you need to update your briefing, if you don't mind me saying. I read the Q&A, and there it was. We still flare a methane. Okay, just checking in.
As
I'm
far
glad.
as the planning authority, no, we don't.
Okay, so
We also struggle with the extra out of it. I'll tell you about
there
that.
you go. Okay, good. I'm so looking forward to the next round. So the truth of it is that we know these issues are huge. They are uncomfortable. We do have to have a route map to get us to a society that is far less dependent on dairy produce and on intensively raised meat. That does not mean to say an end to all meat production. What it will mean is that people will eat less meat, but it will be more quality meat, and here we get into some difficult territory again. That means it has a higher economic value, which will cause some difficulties in terms of the distribution of benefits and costs. I don't know if you're allowed to ask questions, are you, as a speaker? I don't know. Why not?
Great talk, as expected. I wanted to ask, you talked about the fact that in the movement, as you'll know, we often find ourselves way forward compared to the majority of the population, coming from places like Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace here. Like, it is phenomenally difficult to get mass population support for these movements generally. Like, Greenpeace is the largest independent environmental organisation in the world, and they have a membership of like 2 million in a population of 8 billion. And it's like, I wonder if you have any thoughts about how these organisations, if we're going to talk about these organisations or just generally the movement, can appeal to more people.
Well, I do have thoughts about that, but I haven't. But I have another thought, which is to pick up on Ros saying, I don't want to be rude about the lot that came before. I want to be bloody rude about the lot that came before. 14 years of Conservative rule, 5 of them, it has to be said, with the Lib Dems in another manifestation in those bad old days between 2010 and 2015, when the net zero carbon building agenda was swept aside. Anyway, that's another matter. From 2015 through to 2024, there was not one single intervention from that Conservative government about the importance of climate change. They had public information campaigns on quite a lot of things, some of them quite important, many of them not, but not a single peep, not £1 of taxpayers' money committed to the kind of broad-scale, continuing public information campaign to persuade people why this is a climate crisis. It is not just the climate's getting a bit worse and a few more people are affected by flooding and a lot of people are dying in the third world. It's very unfortunate, but don't worry, we're okay here in the UK. Nothing. So I don't want to look to Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth to do the heavy lifting here. We need completely responsible, science-based public information campaigns from government holding that responsibility for the well-being of their citizens today and the well-being of their citizens tomorrow. And that is an absolute top priority for what this Labour government should be doing. But who knows?
I think just one more question, maybe, then we'll head for lunch. Thank you.
Can I just have a quick on what you just said? I feel everyone in a position of power in this system should be fully targeted as a response. We need to, they are making the decisions and they don't know what they're talking about.
Obviously, I couldn't agree with you more. There's a really interesting thing about what people think they know about climate change and how close to the true science of climate change that is today, and different people are at different points in that spectrum. I'm going to pick Jarvis up on the horrendous idea that Just Stop Oil and XR are anarchic organisations. They are absolutely not anarchic organisations. I've just spent 3 days with a group of Just Stop Oil activists, both old and young, and the idea that those would fit into any of your definitions of anarchy is simply not true. They are literally intent on doing the really boring stuff that we were just talking about, which is persuading government to do some really serious engagement with citizens in this country to help them understand. But of course, Just Stop Oil says not just the truth, but the whole truth. That's the story. That's why those 5 people went to prison with prison sentences of 4 and 5 years for wanting to tell the whole truth about climate in the court. And the judge wouldn't allow them to articulate the whole truth. And when you really map out the whole truth, and it is an uncomfortable and often shocking process, it's not surprising that some people find that really, really difficult to deal with. There's a phenomenon called psychic numbing, where you just hear this stuff and you think, oh my God, oh no, we haven't got time to sort that out. And it's not denial. It's not people being irresponsible, uncaring, lack of compassion. It's not that at all. It's just a kind of thing. How do I deal with that? So big. And I don't seem to be getting any affirmation from the people who I want to hear from, namely political, business, religious, artistic leaders, so that we can all be in this together with the whole truth at the heart of what we're trying to do. So I totally agree with you.
Thank you. Thank you again for challenging as well.